Have you ever questioned a memory, a moment from your past that feels hazy, almost like a dream? We think of our memories as perfect recordings of our lives, a private archive of truth. But what if your mind could be turned against you? What if your memories could be rewritten, not by you, but by someone else? This is a story about how the human mind, in its desperate search for answers, can create monsters, and how a memory itself can become the most unreliable witness in a criminal trial, leading an innocent man to confess to nightmares he never lived. Our story begins in the quiet, forested community of Olympia, Washington, in the late 1980s. This was the era of the Satanic Panic, a time when a wave of fear and paranoia about devil-worshipping cults swept across America. At the center of this story is Paul Ingram, a man who seemed to be the pillar of his community. He was a devout Christian, a devoted husband and father of 5, and the respected chairman of the local Republican Party. By day, he served his town as a sheriff's deputy. He was the last person anyone would suspect of harboring a dark secret. The nightmare began not with a crime scene, but with a conversation. In 1988, Ingram's 2 adult daughters, Erica and Julie, leveled a shocking accusation against their father: years of sexual abuse. The allegation was a devastating blow to the family and the community, but it was only the beginning. As the women underwent therapy, their stories began to evolve, twisting into something far more elaborate and terrifying. Their memories grew to include not just their father, but a wide-reaching satanic cult that performed horrific rituals, including animal and human sacrifice. The investigation was led by Detective Ray Bjork of the Thurston County Sheriff's Office. Bjork, like many across the country at the time, was primed to believe in the existence of these hidden, evil networks. He found the daughters' testimonies compelling, and as their stories grew more detailed, so did the scope of his investigation. They named others, friends of the Ingram family, as members of this secret coven. Suddenly, this wasn't just a case of family abuse. It was a conspiracy that threatened the soul of their small town. The investigation was fueled by a growing hysteria. Paul Ingram was brought in for questioning. He was utterly bewildered, completely denying the horrific accusations. He had no memory of any of it. But the investigators were convinced of his guilt. They believed his denials were not lies, but a sign of deep, psychological repression. They told him that his mind had buried the trauma to protect itself. His interrogators, along with a pastor enlisted to help, urged him to search his soul, to pray, to look deep inside himself, and find the hidden memories of the evil he had done. The pressure on Paul Ingram was immense. He was a man of deep faith, a man who loved his family above all else. He was told that his family could not heal until he confessed, that his denial was tearing them apart. He was isolated, sleep-deprived, and subjected to hours of intense, psychologically manipulative questioning. Faced with the unwavering certainty of his accusers and interrogators, his own sense of reality began to crumble. He started to wonder if it was possible, if he could have a dark side so monstrous that his own mind had locked it away. In a desperate attempt to cooperate and save his family, Ingram began the process of remembering. At first, the memories were vague and disjointed, like scenes from a half-forgotten horror movie. But with encouragement and suggestion from the investigators, the images grew sharper, more detailed. He started to confess, his stories matching the lurid details provided by his daughters. He recalled satanic rituals in the woods, chanting in black robes, and unspeakable acts of violence. He was building a narrative of his own guilt, piece by horrifying piece. His confessions became a torrent. Over the course of several weeks and dozens of interviews, he produced over 6,000 pages of handwritten confessions, detailing 2 decades of monstrous activity. The more he confessed, the more his interrogators believed they had their man, the kingpin of a satanic cult. For them, the sheer volume and detail of the confessions were irrefutable proof of his guilt. They did not consider the possibility that they were not uncovering memories, but actively participating in their creation. Yet there was a glaring problem that troubled the investigators: a complete lack of physical evidence. Despite Ingram's detailed confessions of animal sacrifices, ritualistic murders, and buried bodies, police searches turned up nothing. There were no bones, no ritual sites, no corroborating witnesses outside of the small circle of accusers. The only evidence that existed was the stories, the increasingly bizarre and unbelievable stories being told by his daughters, and the memories now being produced by Paul Ingram himself. As the case grew, the defense team, deeply skeptical of the confessions, decided to bring in an expert. They contacted Dr. Richard Offsch, a sociologist from the University of California, Berkeley, and a leading expert on coercive persuasion and thought reform. Offsch was not a typical expert witness. His research focused on how intense social and psychological pressure could lead people to believe and confess to things that were not true. He was about to turn the entire investigation on its head. Offsch reviewed the case files, the videotaped interrogations, and Ingram's voluminous confessions. He saw all the classic hallmarks of a coerced compliant confession, where a suspect confesses to stop the pressure, but he also saw something more disturbing: an internalized false confession. Ingram didn't just say he did it, he now seemed to genuinely believe he had. Offsch hypothesized that Ingram was highly suggestible and that his memories were not being recovered, but actively constructed. He decided to put this theory to the ultimate test. The breakthrough moment in this case was not an uncovered clue, but a carefully designed psychological experiment. Offsch sat down with Ingram and, with the full permission of the defense and prosecution, proposed a new accusation. He told Ingram that his daughters had remembered another event, one they were too ashamed to mention before. Offsch completely fabricated a scenario that Paul had forced his son and daughter to perform a sexual act while he watched. This event had never been mentioned by anyone. It was a complete fiction. Offsch's instructions to Ingram were simple: go home, think about it, pray about it, and see if you can remember this event. The trap was set. If Ingram was truly recovering repressed memories, he would deny this new, false accusation. But if Offsch's theory was correct, Ingram's suggestible mind, now conditioned to produce memories on demand, would do what it had been trained to do. It would create a memory to match the accusation. The fate of the case rested on what Ingram would do next. The result of the experiment was more dramatic and horrifying than even Offsch could have imagined. 2 days later, Paul Ingram returned with another detailed, multi-page, handwritten confession. He didn't just admit to the fabricated event. He described it in vivid, lurid detail. He wrote about where it happened, what was said, how the room was lit, and the emotions he felt. He had created a rich, detailed, and completely false memory, proving conclusively that his mind was a factory for confessions, capable of manufacturing any reality his interrogators suggested. For Dr. Offsch, this was the smoking gun. He concluded that none of Ingram's confessions could be trusted. He wrote a scathing report, stating that Ingram was a psychological victim of modern-day witch hunters. He explained that Ingram's memories were not evidence of guilt, but artifacts of the intense, suggestive, and coercive interrogation process he had endured. He had proven, with scientific certainty, that the state's star witness against Paul Ingram was Paul Ingram himself, and that witness was completely unreliable. The aftermath of Offsch's findings should have stopped the prosecution in its tracks. They now had definitive proof that their main suspect could be induced to confess to anything. However, the prosecutor, John B. PFC Ladenburg, was undeterred. The political pressure was immense, the media frenzy was at its peak, and the emotional testimony of the daughters was powerful. He chose to dismiss Afsh's findings, arguing that even if Ingram had produced one false memory, it didn't mean all the other memories and confessions were false. The case proceeded towards trial. Ingram was facing a lifetime in prison. His own lawyers were now armed with Afsh's powerful evidence and were prepared to fight the charges in court. They believed they could prove that the entire case was a product of hysteria and psychological manipulation. But Paul Ingram, broken and still caught in a web of confusion and a misguided sense of duty to his family, made a stunning decision that would seal his fate. Against the strenuous advice of his own legal team, Paul Ingram decided to plead guilty. He was still convinced on some level that he was guilty and that confessing was the only righteous path forward, the only way to heal his fractured family. He believed that if he accepted his punishment, perhaps they could all move on. On November 30, 1989, he entered an forward plea, maintaining his innocence but acknowledging the prosecution had enough evidence to convict him. It was a tragic, irreversible mistake. The court accepted his plea, and Paul Ingram was found guilty. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison. The man who was once a respected lawman was now a convicted felon, labeled as the monstrous leader of a satanic cult. His family was shattered. His life was destroyed, all based on memories that were, at best, unreliable, and at worst, complete fictions planted in his mind through psychological pressure. The justice system had failed to protect him from the most dangerous place of all, his own mind. The story did not end with his imprisonment. Behind bars, away from the constant pressure of interrogators and family members, Paul Ingram began the slow, arduous process of reevaluating what had happened. With access to Dr. Afsh's report and other psychological literature, he started to understand the concepts of memory contamination and coercive persuasion. He slowly came to the realization that the horrific memories he had confessed to were not real. They were ghosts implanted in his mind. He formally recanted his confession and began a decades-long battle to clear his name from his prison cell. He filed appeal after appeal, arguing that his guilty plea was the result of psychological coercion and that his confessions were demonstrably false. He became a self-taught expert on the very psychological phenomena that had led to his conviction, fighting a legal system that was reluctant to admit it had made such a catastrophic error. The case took another dramatic turn years later when one of his daughters, the primary accuser, recanted parts of her testimony. She admitted that the more extreme allegations of satanic ritual abuse were untrue, a product of pressure from therapists and investigators. While she maintained that the initial abuse had occurred, this partial recantation cast even more doubt on the sensational narrative that had put her father in prison. The foundation of the state's case, already proven to be unstable, was crumbling further. Despite the recantation, Ingram's recantation, and Dr. Afsh's powerful evidence, the legal system held firm. His appeals were consistently denied. The courts relied on the fact that he had entered a guilty plea, a legal maneuver that is incredibly difficult to undo. The system had invested too much in his guilt to simply reverse course. The narrative of the satanic cult leader was more compelling than the complex, disturbing truth about the fallibility of human memory. Paul Ingram served 15 years of his 20-year sentence. He was released from prison in 2003, but not as an exonerated man. He was released on parole, still legally a convicted felon, and forced to live under the strict conditions imposed on sex offenders. He was free from his physical prison, but he could never be free from the prison of his conviction or the public perception of his guilt. He had lost his family, his career, his reputation, and 15 years of his life. The legacy of the Paul Ingram case is profound and deeply unsettling. It stands as one of the most chilling and well-documented examples of false memory and coerced confession in the history of the American justice system. It became a landmark case study, cited in psychology textbooks and law schools across the country, teaching a new generation about the dangers of suggestive interrogation techniques and the incredible malleability of human memory. The case served as a crucial cautionary tale during the decline of the Satanic Panic. It demonstrated how a combination of societal fear, confirmation bias from law enforcement, and questionable therapeutic practices could converge to create a modern-day witch hunt. It revealed that the monsters were not hiding in secret cults, but could be manufactured in the minds of suggestible people, born from fear, pressure, and the desperate need to make sense of trauma. Dr. Richard Offsh's work on the case highlighted the critical need for scientifically grounded expertise in the courtroom. His ingenious experiment provided a rare, unambiguous demonstration of how a false memory could be implanted. His involvement helped to shift legal and psychological standards, leading to reforms in how interrogations are conducted and how testimony based on recovered memories is treated in courts of law. It underscored the fact that a confession is not always the end of an investigation, but sometimes the beginning of a much deeper mystery. For the field of psychology, the Ingram case was a watershed moment. It fueled intense debate and research into the nature of memory itself. It helped solidify the understanding that memory is not a video recorder but a reconstructive process, vulnerable to suggestion, distortion, and outright fabrication. The very idea of repressed memories, once a popular therapeutic concept, came under intense scrutiny, with many experts now viewing the phenomenon with extreme skepticism. The personal tragedy for the Ingram family is incalculable. A family was torn apart by accusations that spiraled out of control, fed by a national hysteria. Regardless of what may or may not have happened initially, the story became a runaway train of fantastical allegations and manufactured memories, leaving a trail of shattered lives. It's a stark reminder that the search for truth, when pursued without caution and objectivity, can end up creating its own devastating fictions. Ultimately, the story of Paul Ingram is a story about the fragility of reality itself. It demonstrates that the line between memory and imagination is terrifyingly thin, and that under the right circumstances, anyone can be led to believe the unbelievable. His ordeal forces us to confront the uncomfortable truth that our own minds can be unreliable narrators of our own lives, a fact that has profound implications for every aspect of our justice system. The other individuals accused by the Ingram daughters, including another law enforcement officer, largely escaped conviction. The case against them, resting solely on the same questionable testimony, fell apart without Ingram's confession to anchor it. This disparity highlighted the immense, and in this case, destructive, power of a confession, even one that had been proven to be the product of psychological manipulation. Their narrow escape further underscores the injustice of Ingram's fate. Today, police interrogation techniques are more heavily scrutinized, and the use of methods that could lead to false confessions is widely discouraged, in part thanks to the lessons learned from cases like this one. The mandatory recording of interrogations in many jurisdictions is a direct response to the need for transparency, to prevent the kind of unseen psychological pressure that was exerted on Paul Ingram in a small room in Olympia, Washington. Paul Ingram passed away in 2018, having spent the last 15 years of his life in a state of legal limbo, free, but not exonerated. He died with his name still not officially cleared. His life story remains a tragic monument to a justice system's failure, a testament to what can happen when the quest for conviction overtakes the search for the truth, and when the complexities of the human mind are dangerously oversimplified. And so, the Ingram case leaves us with a haunting and vital question that echoes far beyond the specifics of this one tragedy. If the very memories that define our reality can be twisted and reshaped, how can we ever be truly certain of justice? It forces us to ask not only if we can trust the memories of others, but whether we can always and without question trust our own.